tonight's discussion and tonight's topic, we're going to be talking about after the hype. So when games sort of are getting released and there's the big hype train for them, there's that sort of momentum, that kind of push where everybody gets excited about them. But what happens after that game's release? What happens after the hype train kind of comes to a stop? And what happens to sort of the folks that buy those games, and what happens after that? And what should we look out for, and how can you kind of avoid getting caught up in that? This is the stuff I want to talk about tonight. So I'm going to start with a definition of hype, because I think we all think we know what hype means. But if I tell you what the kind of the dictionary definition is, then at least we're all singing from the same hymn sheet a bit. So it defines it as either an extravagant or intensive publicity or promotion, which I think the bit that surprised me was the extravagant or intensive, because I think I always just think of hype as being marketing really. Or the other one is to promote or publicise a product or idea intensively, often exaggerating its benefits. So that's the definition of hype. I can completely see why we call it the hype train now, because I think sometimes it's things can get a little bit kind of exaggerated, but not necessarily by the companies, because hype is something that I find in miniature gaming tends not to be done by the companies themselves. Well, not so much by the companies, but tends to be done a little bit more by the actual community. And I'm guilty of this as well. Like when I'm excited about something as well, I can kind of get on the hype train, if you like. I'll talk about stuff on this channel, and I guess some folks might consider that as to me hyping things up. But I'm not doing it from the point of promoting something. Like nobody's paying me to say nice things about something. If I'm getting excited about something, then I'm just sharing with you why I'm excited about something. I tend not to share why I'm not excited about something, because it's a little bit like kind of sort of raining on somebody else's parade a bit. There's always going to be games I'm not excited for that somebody else will, and it's not really my kind of place to sort of bring them down. But if I'm excited about something, I will talk about it. So hype is really what markets the product, and like I say, it doesn't always come from the companies themselves, and it gets folks to kind of sit up and take notice about it. We're in an industry, or we're in a hobby, if you like, in the hobby industry that we love and we buy on a regular basis, is a pretty small and a pretty niche thing, and kind of outside of GW, there's not really anybody else has the kind of money to be going on advertising on kind of so advertising on TV, advertising on the side of kind of advertising hoardings at the side of the road, doing radio ads. It tends to be a lot of just kind of internet marketing, be that word of mouth, be it social media, be it some promoted posts, be it paying some kind of content creators to make things. That tends to be about as much as they can do. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to whip up a bit of a frenzy, get the communities excited about it, and hopefully word of mouth from the communities spreads this kind of hype out, if you like. And it's very different to just marketing a product, because otherwise, if it was just the same, then every release would be hyped to hell, and I don't think that we'd be able to take it. I think our blood pressure would be through the roof if literally everything that was being sort of marketed to us was marketed with like this kind of hype machine. So what happens is folks get excited about it, they get them kind of the FOMO feels, the fear of missing out, they start like their friends are talking about it, and maybe they weren't really considering it before, but all of a sudden everybody's talking about it, and then they feel they're not part of the cool kids, they feel they're not part of the gang, they don't want to miss out, they want to feel part of the community. And so sometimes people can end up changing their mind and actually deciding to buy something, even though initially it wasn't really what they wanted, but they get caught up in that hype train. And short supply of things, or perceived short supply even, can only exaggerate this kind of this FOMO and this hype, this whole like limited edition or pre-order bonuses or short release window. We see it from Kickstarters, like back it on day one and you get a discount, or back it on day one and you get this kind of limited edition miniature that comes with it, Kickstarter exclusive only. Or certainly in terms of GW stuff, there's always this kind of, whether GW comes out and says it or not, there's always this fear of limited amount and limited releases, and if I don't get it now, I'll never be able to get it kind of thing. And all of these things basically kind of add to the hype machine. So once the hype's died down, what happens to the games? Now, something I wanted to talk about is this. And this is basically, I forget what it's called now. It's got some scientific name, but it's kind of like, it's called like the hype cycle. And this essentially is the kind of like the phases, if you like, that something getting hyped about goes through. So it starts off with what's called a technology trigger. This is basically like something is being launched. It's a new product. In this instance, it's like a technology product. But actually, like in our instance, it can be a new game. It can be a new miniature. It can be a new book or something. And basically what happens is over a very short period of time, the visibility for this product basically goes through the roof. And that's the point where we see that kind of that first high peak. And that's the point of kind of like maximum hype, if you like. That's the point where everybody is kind of like, when's it coming out? How much is it going to cost? Pre-orders are going up this weekend. I can't wait to get on board. You've got to be there at 10 o'clock to kind of order it, that type of stuff. And then what happens is right at that peak is pretty much the point at which everybody gets it in their hands, or the people that certainly could get their hands on it, get it in their hands. And there's a little bit of a kind of like a plateau at the top there where people are dead excited. It's just arrived. They rip off the wrapping. They open the box. They see all the grey plastic, or they see all the miniatures inside and all the cardboard stuff to punch out and all that kind of stuff. And they get really excited for it. And then there's this kind of this cooling off period, if you like, and it comes down to what's called the trough of disillusionment. And this is the point where where people realize actually that the size of the prize, if you like, that the hype that they generated in themselves, the way they felt about it, how strongly they felt about this product, the product doesn't actually live up to it. And it might be it's a really, really good game. They might be beautiful models, but I think there's sometimes a little bit of buyer's remorse. There's a little bit of like, oh, I've just bought more stuff and I've still got a pile of stuff that I haven't even touched yet. And there's this kind of low point at this point. Over a period of time, we then kind of come through what they call this trough of disillusionment, and we come into the slope of enlightenment. And this is the point where actually over a period of time, and this can be weeks, months, even years later, this is a point where people start to kind of discover this game almost for a second time. And it might be that lots of people are playing it now, or that basically it's the game has kind of it's ironed out any of its kinks. It's kind of like it's on maybe a second edition or something, or it's maybe kind of sort of had an update or an errata or something like that. And it's the point where people's kind of interest, people are just getting interested on a normal basis, basically. They're generating their own interest. They're not being hyped to be interested in it. And then you get this plateau of productivity, and this is the point where the game is out there in the wild, it's been out for a while, and people are just kind of happily playing it or whatever it is. But nothing ever lives up to that original kind of hype. So some companies, at this point, when we get to this top of this hype sort of chart, some companies have basically made their money at this point. They've got a community for the game. That the hype has generated a community. There's Facebook groups opened up. People have started to kind of start podcasts for them. All this kind of stuff. And so what they do is they quickly follow it up with more releases while the kind of the feel good factor is still there, while the feeling's still really strong and high. This kind of strike while the iron's hot mentality. On the other side, there are some companies who basically, they've made their money now, but they just basically move on and kind of go to the next project. And that's one of the reasons that there's this kind of like this kind of downward slope straight after it, is because actually there's this point where people go, oh, so you've got my money now, like you don't want to talk about it. And it's because basically they've hyped it up, they've talked about it, it's been on their kind of website every week, they've been all over Facebook, and then all of a sudden they kind of just stop talking about it, because at that point, well, we've sold them all, there's no more to sell, so there's no point talking about it anymore. And I think that's sometimes what kind of heads off down that cliff as well. However, the player base have also they've also had their dopamine hit, if you like. They've had that kind of the rush of the excitement of the hype. They've managed to get their hands on it. They've got the box in their hands now. But they're also looking for the next high now. We're in a kind of a consumer age now where people are constantly looking for that next hit, that next, what's next, what's coming out next, what's new. People are constantly asking what's new. I have to do it. It's kind of part of what I'm doing. And I go through flat periods of time where it's tough to talk about stuff. It's tough to find things to talk about because there isn't anything new coming, or the new stuff that's coming is just not really my bag. It's not really what I'm looking for. And I don't want to say that I kind of feed the machine, if you like, but people generally don't respond the same way. If I go, oh, right, tonight I want to talk about this game that came out 3 years ago, and people have already kind of made their mind up about that game at that point. They either already love the game, or they've decided it's not really for them. So But hobbyists are exactly the same. They're constantly looking for that next fix, if you like. It's like, they love going on that journey, like love it or hate it sometimes. Like there's sometimes a bit of animosity in them communities when you're kind of coming up that curve. But they're looking for the next big hit. And if you don't, I'm sure you do believe me. If you don't believe me, how many boxes were you really hyped for that are still kind of sitting in your hobby room or sitting on your hobby shelf, completely untouched? Maybe you've opened them and had a look through them. Maybe you've kind of clipped out the sprues and you've built the miniatures, but you've done nothing else with them. Maybe you've painted a couple, or you've started to paint a couple, and then something shiny's come along and kind of took your eye off it and sent you off down onto the next one and getting ready for the next sort of big hype project. I know I've done it before, and I'll probably do it again in the future, but it just shows that actually sometimes what we're doing with hype is like it's like the chase is more enjoyable than the catch, if you like. It's a bit like fishing kind of thing. Once you've caught the fish, just throw it back kind of thing. You don't necessarily, like, you don't do anything with it. It's just like, I wanted to catch a fish, I've caught a fish, and I'm just going to throw it back again. And herein really lies the problem of hype, is that these games basically some of them can disappear without a trace. On the other hand, some things kind of basically can flourish a little bit later down the line. I've got a few examples here. Games like Star Wars Legion, games like Marvel Crisis Protocol, and games like Dead Zone, which on their initial release probably had a little bit of hype, but then basically almost kind of like just sort of not died a death so much, but went really quiet, whether it be for things like Star Wars Legion, there were some release issues. Things like Dead Zone, it's just, Mantic games that tend not to be as popular as something like GW, but they kind of they find their footing a little bit later on. They go quiet because basically the community hasn't enjoyed the game or whatever it is, or they've already gone to the next hype train. But what happens with these kind of games is they come back almost like for a second time. Like Marvel Crisis Protocol with me, I'd already written it off as a game I didn't want, but at this point in time, it's a couple of years old. There's a lot more releases out there for it. There's a great community sort of kind of sprung up around it, and there's lots of people playing it locally that weren't even looking at the game 12 months ago, and certainly weren't looking at it when it first came out. Like Star Wars Legion is exactly the same. It suffered from a few release issues when it first came out. You essentially saw a lot of Vader versus Luke like for their first kind of 6 months, and now it's had a lot more releases. We've had that kind of the droids box with the Clone Wars stuff, and we're starting to get more variety and more faction stuff, and it's becoming a very popular game again. And sometimes this can be why it's better to get into a new game, and when I say new, I mean new to you, not necessarily kind of like the big hype, if you like, once the game is established. Like I've found this personally with things like Kings of War, with Malifaux 3rd Edition, and again, as I mentioned before, with Marvel Crisis Protocol as well. These are games that at that point of basically, I didn't get caught up in the hype originally. I kind of found them on my own, like later on, looking for something interesting, and something's piqued my interest, and rather than getting dragged along in the hype, I'm just finding them and enjoying them because I've genuinely just enjoyed those games. Like I said before, like these companies have these games have like thriving communities now. There's plenty of players to kind of get involved with. The kinks have been ironed out, as I mentioned before as well. Like the rule sets have been tweaked, the kind of points have been updated. And I think that's sometimes, like I've found this with, if I take War Cradle as an example, with Wild West Exodus. When Wild West Exodus first came out, I was a bit confused with the game because it was constantly changing. It was constantly having the rules updated, and it was constantly having stats updated. And it feels now that it's in a much more stable place. And I enjoy the game now, but I didn't enjoy it so much back then. I've got this kind of feeling a little bit with Dystopian Wars, is that I feel that every time I kind of look online, something's changed a little bit, and I feel like I'm almost holding back from jumping in because it feels like it's not in a settled place yet. People love the miniatures, they love the models, they love painting them up and stuff. People are enjoying playing the game, but for me personally, it's not really in a stable place yet. So this also happens that some games or some companies, if you like, they kind of fly under the radar, and they never really get the exposure that they deserve. These games are never ever going to be hyped. If you think about some of the mini agnostic games, like I'm sure they're probably great rule sets, but they're never going to be the next big hype type thing. I think Reign in Hell's maybe a bit of an exception in the fact that it was by kind of two well-known YouTubers who basically released the rules, and I think anything by Joseph McCulloch kind of gets a little bit of attention just based upon kind of history. But generally, a lot of these kind of sort of indie games and indie companies, like think about like things like Moonstone, think about Burrs and Badgers, think about Drowned Earth. These are all fantastic games, but there's never like a huge hype around them because the communities are, whilst very loyal, they're just not the size of something like GW to kind of get the mass of people excited about them. Sort of in the way Fantasy Flight can hype a board game, if you like. So to bring it around really and to close it up, it's fun to get on the hype train. It's exciting to kind of hypothesize about what's coming out and come up with some ideas and get excited about a new game. But what I would suggest is kind of when you're getting on that hype train, knowing like kind of what kind of a journey it is. Like, is this an exciting journey around the world where you're going to enjoy it and kind of really like sort of get excited about the game and build them miniatures and play the game when it's finished? Or is it just kind of a journey to the end of the track and once you get there, that's it? Basically, it's a little bit of a kind of like a bit of a dead end. So kind of knowing why you're getting on that hype train in the first place is really important, and I guess really is what it's all about.
Thanks for watching my video. I hope that you really enjoyed it. And if you did, why not consider clicking on the suggested video below to see more of the work that I've done. If you'd like to support the long-term sustainability of this channel, why not consider checking out my Patreon, where you can pledge and support from as little as $2 a month. And there is lots of different tiers and bonuses, which will give you access to a private Discord server. It will give you free t-shirts, free mugs, a podcast every month, and a number of other things, including getting your name at the end of every video, like these awesome folks who already support me now.